Lou, are we ready? Okay. I did want to wait with Janelle. Are you ready to go? Okay. So I want to give a welcome here and kind of set the stage a little bit and then turn it over to others. And just wanted to, welcome folks. And before we start, can I go ahead and get a show of hands? Who are residents of Donovan Smith? Okay, great. Okay. Thanks for coming. So over here we have translators. So this is for both people asking questions and for us at the table to just be mindful to allow time for translation, and if that's not something you're used to. Okay. And we were hoping to have a little bit less formal setting, but I think nowadays we have to record we want to record our meetings and allow a virtual audience. So this setup is really the most conducive to doing that. So I just wanted to highlight that fact. With respect to being able to make comments, our Blue, I believe, has a pass mic. So if you would like to, speak
John
at some point, raise your hand. We can bring the mic to you, and you can speak right from your seat. For those that haven't attended a public meeting before, generally what we ask is just give your name and where you live. You don't have to be very specific about where you live. You can say, I'm Joe from Donovan Smith, and give your comment, and we'll appreciate that. The other thing I'd like to mention, just for those who are new to these types of meetings and like to get other ways to get involved, the city, hopefully you found this through some channel, but we do have the city's website, which I think is going to be provided throughout here. That's a way to track a calendar that the city has of other meetings, Parks and Rec, and different committees that the city has where policy and direction will be shaped, essentially. The other, just if you're informal, I know that some have actually attended, I see Donna here, is I have a informal coffee that we hold currently at the Net House, and that's in Canal Front Park. If you know where Canal Front Park is, there's a building there that's close to the street, and while it's good weather, we have it on the deck, and when it's bad weather, we can go inside, and it's BYO coffee. It's bring your own coffee. Okay. All right. And just for purposes of recording and otherwise, again, if you could put your phones on silent or buzz, that would be helpful as well. And then with that, I will turn over to Joe. This is, if we want to go ahead and maybe...
Joe Elder.
Let's good point. There was a lot to take on there. We'll turn to our translator. I broke my own rule.
I was going to...
Thank you for that. Okay, and with that, Joe, do you want to go through a bit of the purpose?
Sure. The purpose of the meeting. Before I start with the purpose of the meeting, I want to remind all of you that you're now residents of Lewis, and you have the right to vote in Lewis. So please stop into our city hall. I don't know all the details that you're going to need to have with you to get registered, but you can vote here in Lewis now, so we encourage you to do that. Now, the purpose of the workshop. How about I go line by line?
Sure.
Okay. The purpose of the workshop. So the purpose of the meeting, number one, is to educate the citizens and officials about zoning terminology and concepts. Number two, to review and develop an understanding of the proposed text amendment that is under consideration. To collaborate with the residents to allow the Lewis Mayor and City Council to make the best decision for the community. To build community consensus to ensure the code reflects the zoning needs of the community. Next would be to assist the Lewis Mayor and City Council in finalizing the first step in the land use process. And that would be two parts. First, to develop the text amendment, which is the draft ordinance, and then finally to develop the conditional use. There may be some terms that I used that you don't understand yet, but we'll make sure that you understand them as we go along.
Okay.
Thank you.
Were you going to go through the ground rules? Carolyn, you want to cover that?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
And as I'm sitting here, I realize that the ground rules I have are not the ground rules you have. So the first thing I'm going to do is give you the right ones, right? So I appreciate very much if I just do it the same way. I'll say it. Thank you.
Carol, you want to use this one?
I beg your pardon?
You might have a draft.
Cleo gave me his.
Okay.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to get down to business with how we're going to do things here. We want to hear and address the residents' concerns. So first of all voices will be heard. And without saying, we will all treat one another with respect. Listen with an open mind. As always, it's okay to disagree. It's all right to disagree if you don't, if we can agree to disagree is the best way to put it. Be problem and solution focused. Everyone will participate. We'll allow 3 minutes for speaking, and we'll focus on zoning and proposed text amendment.
So we're going to move now to the concerns that the city has heard from residents. We've broken this down to about 6 different questions or concerns that have been expressed. So the first of the 6 most commonly asked questions is, we don't know where our land lease area is. And so as part of our conditional use, all the land lease areas and open spaces shall be identified, and the land lease property corners will be required to be marked, so you'll be able to see them. The city cannot require a site plan without a conditional use application. Second question we've heard. We want to know why the city is moving so quickly through the process. So it may seem that we have moved quickly, but it's been over 4 months since the beginning of this whole process. The conditional use process should have been submitted after the annexation last May, or May of 2022, when that was approved. But we're getting to it now. Until the code is amended, or if it's amended, a conditional use application cannot be submitted. So the process, if in fact there are code changes approved, the process for a text amendment and the conditional use application that would come after that would take approximately 6 to 8 months. So it will be a while before there's any kind of final resolution to any of the concerns here. So a third common concern has been, why not wait until the sewer and water has been installed? The community currently is considered non-conforming, as the park is not a permitted use within the zoning district. So if something catastrophic happens to a house that requires a new house to be replaced or placed, a new house cannot be placed until a conditional use has been obtained. So that is the concern now. This is not just about additional homes and others. It's about the current homes as well, whether they can be replaced or not replaced. The fourth question is, we want to know if any new homes placed in the park can be rented or owned. And the answer is, any new homes placed there can be owned or rented. So there's either 2 options there. The fifth question is, we want to know what the city is doing to fix the electric concerns. The city is looking at different options to try and have the electric situation resolved. It may take a while, but the city is working on it and working on a plan. And the final question is, referencing the water and sewer project, when will it finally be completed? It's scheduled to be completed in November of next year, and that's the current schedule now. Our Lewis BPW holds a monthly construction progress meeting. It's the first Wednesday of the month at 10 o'clock in council chambers, and that would be a good opportunity if you want updates as to the progress. You can attend that either in person or virtually.
Who applies for a conditional use?
The property owner of the development.
So it has to be zoned before he can do a conditional use?
So I'm going to get to that. I'm going to answer that in a little bit. So good evening, and thank you for attending. I'm Janelle Cornwall. I'm the Planning and Building Manager with the City of Lewis. Some quick housekeeping. If you're looking for the restrooms, they're out the door and across the hall. And if you didn't grab a handout, they're at the back table with some snacks and water. So I'm going to walk you through some zoning basic information that I heard there might be questions about, and then we're going to go over what the proposed ordinance says and then get your feedback. So the big thing is zoning. What is it? Zoning is what determines what you can and cannot do on a property and where structures can and cannot be placed. And the zoning is then broken down into districts. So you have examples of Rs, those are our residential zones. Our I is an industrial zone. Our commercials are like limited commercial or general commercial. So they're broken down by groups. And that's why you see that R2, it's one of many different residential zonings. So and within each of those zoning districts, they have their own permitted uses, conditional uses, and special exceptions. And they also have uses that are not allowed. So again, 3 types of uses. One is a permitted use. There's no review. You can just go ahead and use that use in that zoning district. The second is a conditional use. It's potentially allowed, but it has to go through a required review process from the Planning Commission and Mayor and City Council. The example of a conditional use is a manufactured home community within the R2 zoning district. So is everybody comfortable with that and understands the zoning districts, and within each zoning district there are permitted uses?
Why does a manufactured home have to have a park have to have a conditional use?
So when the zoning was established, the council went through and identified uses that make sense just to be outright permitted, and they went through and identified uses that should go through a public hearing process as a conditional use, and the manufactured home community was one of them that at the time the zoning was established should require a conditional use.
It seems to me what should be said is that Lewis tried very hard to prevent manufactured home communities, and that's the reason it wasn't in the zoning. The zoning is not something that's sacrosanct or drops from the sky. The zoning was created to both permit and prohibit, and we need to be honest about the fact that Lewis worked very hard for many years not to let manufactured home communities in, which is why it blocked others which are right at the periphery. So we need to be fully disclosing and honest about why it's there. It's not just arbitrary.
We don't all know that. So thank you for that. But no, I'm just saying we didn't know that, Rick.
If the owner never applies for a conditional use, then what?
So if the owner never applies for a conditional use, the park stays non-conforming. If anybody tries to do anything with their property, they would most likely need a variance from the Board of Adjustment. You wouldn't be able to replace your home. And those are the big ones.
The reason I asked, because when I was looking at the Sussex Code, and I understand, the reason I asked is because when I was looking at the Sussex non-conforming for manufactured homes, and we've only been 18 months out of Sussex, they do allow for replacement. So I was wondering what the difference is here.
So just so everybody understands, the city's non-conforming section of the code is not just regarding manufactured home communities. It's regarding any non-conforming use throughout the city. So if you have another use that's non-conforming with the city, and it goes away, you cannot put it back. So it's a general item across the code for everybody.
According to your last meeting you had, if we wanted, according to you, you said we could put new mobile homes in there, but they had to be like 5 years old, as long as it was a double wide, matches up with a double wide, single wide.
So that's the county code.
So now that doesn't apply now, right?
So as of today, if you bought a brand new manufactured home and wanted to place it in the park, you cannot. Because the park is considered non-conforming. You cannot make the property more non-conforming, and it's a non-conforming use. I'm just let her gonna.
This is about the translation.
Do you want translating back
She
out?
says she wanted to know if somebody, her question was, can you put in a house currently in the park, and it's not conforming. So you would either have to take it out or be not conforming.
So if somebody buys a new house and wants to bring it in, they cannot, because one, it's a use that does not comply with the zoning code at this moment. So no new homes can be placed in the community right now. You could attempt to go to the Board of Adjustment and ask for a use variance. However, they are typically overturned by the court. And I'm going to look to Max to answer that question about the use variances. There's a mic too, Max.
Your voice is loud enough.
It is very difficult to get a use variance because the test is so hard to meet.
Last thing is you'll have to excuse the questions because the park is 60 years old and we've only been with you for a year and a half. So we were told things were going to be grandfathered, I guess, until we hit the new code. So after about, maybe 58 years of one particular rule, you'll have to excuse our difficulty in understanding all of a sudden how things change this way.
So that's because Sussex County has their zoning.
I know.
And
Yes.
City of Lewis has their zoning. So you've got different rules and regulations.
I get that now.
Yeah.
For manufactured homes.
For a lot of things.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, okay, thank you. But what I don't understand very well, I'm sorry, because I'm listening to two things and sometimes it's like, no, I didn't understand that. That's what's happening in translation.
That's okay.
And so for me, that I'm new in all these things, I try to understand for my people here, the Latinos, because I want to talk to them and explain more and more. So that's what is important. And so what you mean is that because of the new codes, now that the land is annexed, it's part of the city, the old codes of being grandfathered are gone. So what is going to happen with the people that have the manufacturing houses there because of the new code? Are they going to have to move those things?
No, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
So just to clarify, Charito Calvache is a community advocate, and she does a lot of education in the community. So it's very important that she leaves here. Have you got a copy of the presentation in Spanish? You have a copy of the presentation? Okay. So it's very important that she leaves here with the appropriate information. This is also being recorded. So more than likely, she will take to the air and to the Spanish radio and will do some sort of educational something or another to make sure that her people are represented well and that they're not disadvantaged by these changes.
Right.
And I believe.
I know.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We have leases that have not been mentioned, and within the lease, there are many different rules, and if any are breached, we can be evicted or our lease terminated or all sorts of other experiences. So when each of us bought into this community, we were told it was a homeowners community.
Right.
And within our leases, most of the agreements support that. No businesses, no rentals, no bed and breakfast. It's a quiet homeowners, one family. I thought we were zoned R1, residential one family. Now we're talking about expansion, which I'm not against, but I would like to know the environmental impact of these considerations when, in fact, we've been working, 6, 7 years trying to get clean water and a working septic. Now, to this date, we don't have it, so you can understand that we're greatly concerned that nothing yet has been made clear. There's constant proposals without any information regarding specifics of lots that you're considering. I mean, for me, this is an old story that we've been trying to clarify for many years. And in the end, it seems as though you're negotiating with the property owner in order to facilitate his fantasy of 130 homes. Now, we didn't buy intentionally into a non-conforming grandfather community, yet all along with every meeting, and as you say, it's recorded, we were promised by former mayors, councilmen, and such that we would, if we were annexed, and we never asked for that, we just wanted clean water and working septic, that our grandfather's status would be honored, is acknowledged, and the current zoning, non-conforming, etc., is all acknowledged and will be worked within whatever. We were never told of any other considerations of expansion or zoning or coding, variances and changes. So yeah, this for us seems very premature and still, with all due respect, not very well planned. We don't see, I mean, the report and survey that BPW did for our initiative was very explanatory. I mean, it was everything we needed to know. This stuff is back to envisioning imaginary boxes, and we can't do that. We have to know what lots you're considering, or the owner is considering. That's a confusion as well. And what are the specs? What are the models? It's like you're committing us to the Wild West.
Can I say something?
And we have years of documentation and witness, and just walk through any one of KDM's communities and you'll see how poorly run and how much the residents, the owners are suffering.
Let's focus, as you said, on the zoning, and I think
It's all
you've
relative,
gone over.
sir. It's all relative.
I think that that's the purpose of this evening.
Un momento.
They're trying to involve everyone.
Joe?
I also just want to, and as mentioned earlier, a representative of BPW is here, but this discussion is in no way will slow or expedite the hookup of the water and sewer. This conversation that we're having right now is in no way impacting the rate at which that piece will happen. I just want to give you some assurances of that. They're happening in parallel tracks.
I'm not here to oppose or agree or disagree. I'm here to translate. Yes, she did say that for years, the council and the mayor have been telling them a lot of things. And that, what was the other point? That they were told that all of these things that they knew to be rules would be in effect when they became to the new, and that there are also environmental issues that have not been addressed.
I'd like to address just a couple of things that were said. First, with respect to rentals and owning, the city cannot impose a rule that has to be homeowner occupied, but the owner certainly can within their contracts. So that's where that requirement comes from, number one. Number two, the properties remain to be, and we use the term grandfather, and if you think of grandfather, it's a legally existing non-conforming use. The two terms are synonymous, so I don't want there to be any confusion about that. And when
Let
you're
her get that much out.
I think the thing that really sort of resonates with us, since we're only a year and a half into Lewis, but 60 years or more old, is that we are, the thing that I think sort of feels uncomfortable is that we are home owners, we own our homes, we rent the land. Very uncomfortable to think that people have invested and made homes, and all of a sudden the city can say, well, he can put a rental in, you can be a rental. So I'm very glad, sir, that you clarified that, because that's a real sticking point, that now all of us own our homes. A lot of us have mortgages as well as paying lot rent, and it just doesn't feel right that all of a sudden the landowner can put in rentals. Now, we've met some folks here who live in developments that don't allow rentals, and I guess that's the homeowner. I guess that's the land.
It's the property owner.
Except the property owner with us is not consistent and he's always sort of taking advantage. So we may not be able to rent, but he can put homes in there to rent. And that degrades, and that degrades the community. And we work hard to keep our community safe. We struggle, we really struggle. So that whole thing about rentals is really probably the most sensitive thing that we're feeling versus, and also putting in more places. So rentals, we own our homes. 30 more homes, well, I guess you'll get to that.
Okay. I'm vacation rental in that property, okay? I've known everybody here. They've all been friends. I have grandchildren, small grandchildren. I have teenage granddaughters. They ride their bikes around this community. I know everybody now that's in the community, so my kids feel safe in that community. When you start bringing in rentals and you don't know their backgrounds, you don't know who they are, then you're putting danger to our kids that run around the neighborhood. I mean, and it's all children. All the children, I'm concerned about all the children running around the neighborhood and not knowing who lives in the neighborhood. They are reconstructing homes now. There's building permits, I'm gonna say maybe 5. Who are moving in those homes when they're done? We don't know. So for us not to know who is living in our community and coming into our community, we cannot feel safe in that community. And I think that's part of the city of Lewis's sort of responsibility to look in to see who is moving into these trailers and our landlords have responsibility for background checks for I'm saying, for safety. That's my biggest concern, is the rentals, more homes, not knowing who is coming in, for all of our children to feel safe in our neighborhood.
I would like to respond to that, and then we'll turn it back over to Janelle to go down to the setbacks, because on the educational component. So I totally understand your concern. From the city's perspective, right, we have a constitutional duty not to be able to keep people out based upon certain backgrounds or races or things like that. We have to treat everybody equally, right? So to the extent the city is kind of powerless to address who's going to be moving in, because they can't at the end of the day say you can't move in.
And that's anywhere.
Yeah, that's anywhere, but you have to know, they have to know who's moving in. I mean, they do security checks, they do background checks, they do credit checks. So they have to know who's moving in that trailer. And they have no idea who's moving in that trailer, how many people are living in those trailers. If you go and ask them, they don't even know if they're alive or dead, the people that live in those trailers. I had a neighbor pass away. They didn't even know that, you know what I mean? There's no communication with them to us.
Okay, Janelle.
All right, so let's get on to definitions.
We understand definitions, but
Actually,
do we have because it was, like one of the people said, sort of a unwilling or having to be annexed into Lewis for sewer and water because our landowner didn't want to participate. Is it possible, because I don't know if you're ever going to have any other manufactured home parks. My fantasy is that there would be a zoning, so because we sort of became stuck together because of circumstances that apply to our park, and then you can write other zoning for our other parks. For example, could you say home owner families and no multi-party rentals or things like that? Just considering, and then we can be educated. But this is a sticking point.
I'll just mention the city of Lewis does have a short-term and a long-term rental license process. So some of that's defined through there. I do think that there's an important aspect to understanding the definitions for some that aren't as aware, to understand the implications of setbacks and such. So if you don't mind just we can now move forward to that piece, and then now the questions are specific to that component of setbacks and separation distances, lot coverage, and so on.
All right, so at the last meeting, there was some questions about what setbacks, separation distance, and lot coverage are. So we're going to go over those. So what a setback is, it's like an imaginary box on your land leased area or anybody else's land that says this is where the house can go. So if we go to the next slide, we've got an example of, there are typically 3 different types of So you have a front yard setback, that's a distance away from the street or the right-of-way that the house has to be set back from. The rear yard setback is the opposite from your front yard setback. Again, it's on the opposite side of the street. That's also the distance away from the property line or your land lease line where you can build the house. And the side yards are on the side of the property. Also, again, tells you where you can place a house.
You're talking about houses, how about a shed?
Correct. Yes, the same thing. So yes, sheds have setbacks, houses have setbacks. Any type of structure has a setback and has to comply with a setback requirement.
I know Billy Betts came out and measured and told me where to put my shed at. He worked for KTM, worked there for years. Now he's retired. I'm not about to move that shed. I've already told where I can put it. And I'm sure other people I know has been the same way. I did it exactly like he said. That's all.
So nobody's going to make anybody move a shed. The shed, again, is non-conforming, so it can, or it conforms. It's quite possible they comply with code or they don't, but they're not required to move. Setbacks, we're talking about for new construction. She's coming.
So our homes are all okay. Nobody has to move their home.
Correct. No one has to move the
I just wanted
home.
to clarify that because some people were saying, we're going to have to move our home.
No.
John's getting his steps. I'm going to jump ahead into one of the things. It appears to me that what is being proposed, and you can tell me if I'm reading this wrong, is to look at all the current what is and make that the rule prospectively. That to me seems a complete cop-out in the following sense. What is not a product of a reasoned decision necessarily. So it seems to me that you want to decide what setbacks are appropriate, what distance requirements are appropriate, and not, as I'm reading this, says we are just going to do a survey and adopt what's there and have that be the new rule. That doesn't seem right. Isn't the better idea is to consider what the rule should be going forward, writing on a clean slate, grandfather in existing places as has been discussed. But it seems to me, why on earth would you want to put into play forever the setbacks that exist merely because they exist? What am I missing there? And that's not just on the setbacks, that's on all of that. I'm using that as a shorthand from the various things, the distance requirements, all of that. If I've read it wrong, please tell me. And then everything I've said doesn't make sense. But it seems to me it does not make sense as a policy matter to say we're just going to codify what exists without analyzing whether we think it's any good or not. Seems to me your obligation is to decide what you think is the right policy going forward for these various things, implement that going forward, and then deal with existing prior nonconformity separately. But merely to say, well, we're going to have a new rule that says going forward we can do what exists now because it exists now, seems to be an abdication of your responsibility to actually make policy.
Okay, thank you. I do want to speak up right now. Are you the same person who used to work in the county?
Yes.
Yes, it seems to me, and I don't want to be disrespectful with you, but I have to say it's a little bit bizarre that you were the same person that were then working with this property and you did not solve the problem when you were a county official and now you are here in charge of the same property, trying to do this that, as the lawyer said, it doesn't have any sense. And I have to tell you, did the people of this Smith Donovan knew that with the annexation they were going to be in the mercy of the landlord, of whether they could be renters or owners? Were they explained that they were going to be at the mercy? Because the lawyer here said that the city doesn't have the constitutional right to decide. That sounds to me a little bit bizarre.
2 points of law, maybe 3. First, it was always explained from the very beginning of this process, and I was here, that upon annexation, the properties would be a legally existing non-conforming use. Second, the city cannot, from a constitutional perspective, ban rental units. That is something that was imposed by the property owner in the past. City can't do it. Third, Ms. Cornwell's prior employment as a planner, she did not, as a point of law, control the decisions that were made with respect to this property or any other property. That was the decision of the appropriate body, Sussex Council, and in this case, the town council of the city of Lewis.
Okay. Esos son los 3 puntos.
Hi, this would probably be something you would answer, Max. Can the city say what type of housing he can put in there if he does meet these conditional use things and all that? Because we're very concerned about him putting in a bunch of FEMA houses and selling them, and I think that's kind of illegal, but it's been done in the past.
Mr. Mayor, I know you're going to reel me in, so I'm going to do this really quickly because I know Janelle has more to speak about. But to answer your question directly, so long as the city doesn't act in a discriminatory manner, the city has the ability to regulate building materials, heights, setbacks. They have almost plenary power with respect to sort of standards, and it's 22 Delaware Code 303, if my memory is correct, on that. So yes, they have some authority. They can't act in a discriminatory manner.
I struggle with this. I'm still struggling. We got annexed, and now we can't be what we are. I looked up our original designation from Sussex, and it was manufactured home park. Manufactured home park designation in Sussex is homeowners, family, no rentals, no multifamily, no turnover with 10 and 11 people, and that's who we are. And I'm having trouble with the redefinition of who we are. Now that we're here, we have to, rent, and folks come in and houses close together, and it's sort of like, this is what we are, an old-fashioned, and maybe an anachronism, but this is who we are, older trailers, FEMA trailers, folks who have mortgages, folks who work very hard, folks who don't feel safe, folks who don't let their children out. This is a little abstract to me because I guess I'm on the street level where it's not safe and you want to do different things that really are not appropriate or applicable to who we are. So I love education and I read all the time. I always have to learn, but it's sort of like a square peg in a round hole. So as you really start thinking about what applies to our community, we'll take the education, but let's not lose sight of what applies to this anachronism that started out with hunting, with, campers, and people in tents, and people fishing and coming in to enjoy. At this point, we can't even have boats there. So I love the Unless they have to
Okay.
be 16 feet, and if you put it out in the bay, you know, you probably get swamped. But what I guess I'm saying is that we are in anachronism, and I thought I had the reassurance of Lewis that they would treat us like an anachronism, just like downtown. I'm sorry, we need to get educated.
Let her finish her presentation.
Okay, so let's take and look at some examples of what setbacks look like. So on the next slide, we've got some examples of what a side yard setback is. So if you look on the one on the left, you can see that one's 4 feet from the property line, and it's also 2.5 feet from the street. So again, that one has a 4-foot side yard setback and a 2.5-foot front yard setback. And then the one on the right has probably about a 3-foot front yard setback.
Is that for existing or new?
This is an example. These are all examples of existing homes within the community. So I know it says new replacement, but these are old surveys. These are from like the last 20 years, 10, 20 years.
I'm reading in this booklet where
I hear someone talking.
proposed Lewis code is 3/4 of an acre minimum for the community.
We're gonna get there. Let me get there first.
I heard through on the street that you're okay, and your committee was okay with just one parking spot per mobile home.
No. That's actually not a code requirement. Code is 2.
Well, I don't have to, a lot of other people don't have to. But a lot of the people in the community, the husband and wife, both work. So they need at least 2 parking spots. And some of them have 3, 4, 5, 6 feet.
So, do you want stuff?
A lot of us just have 1.
Okay. We don't.
And how many families, you know, the husband and wife both work? You need at least 2 parking spots.
So the code requires 2 parking spaces. If you have 1, you're non-conforming and you can remain that way.
This is the key part.
What do you mean, since I only have 1, I'm non-conforming?
So again, if you only have a parking space for one car, you are required to have 2. But if you only have 1, you don't conform to the code, so you're non-conforming. But the city's not going to come say you have to install a second parking space.
And but these guys are putting in brand new streets, supposedly, can't they also make another parking spot?
Thank you. We're just going to get you the microphone so everybody can hear you.
We'll take this question,
We
and then
need to-
we're going to need to structure it a little more, where we're going to have to allow to get through a section. In this case, we're going to next talk about separation. And then we're going to get through separation, and then we'll take questions, because otherwise, it has to be contextual, and we're building on something, because ultimately, we're trying to inform people of some people are coming from a base point of what are even setbacks, lot coverage, and these things. And those things will be important to consider as we do craft a conditional use ordinance.
Okay.
Now I'm gonna talk about the money. Talk about the Lewis Diner, that big sign out there. It's got, originally KDM, Ken Burner, got $2 million to fix water and sewer. I want to know, the sign told us like 5 million plus. Where's this other money going to?
Why don't you let Austin take that? Or can we, that's not relevant to this.
Yeah, again.
We can't answer that.
It's the 5.5 million from the state program to pay for it.
It's going in the ground in the form of sewer and water pipes.
Yeah, it's two separate loans. So you have the clean water loan through DENREC, and then you have the drinking water loan through Delaware Health and Social Services. So it's two separate loans totaling $5 million. I'm using rough numbers.
$5.5 million just to do the water, sewer, and the street.
Yes.
Yes.
Just?
Okay. Okay, so I think we've gone on a good concept of what setbacks are, so let's move to separation distances. And we'll let Janelle get through the examples, and then we will take questions on this, at that point, separation distances.
So the separation distance is the distance between the buildings, and it's the distance between the buildings from one building to another building. So it'll go from the edge of the house that will include the porch to the adjacent house. So that's what the separation distance is. And some of these examples are showing a 10-foot separation distance, a 17-foot separation distance. There's even a 5-foot separation distance within the community. And again, it also includes from a home to a shed, there's a separation distance. So the next slide just also shows other examples of separation distance within the community. So lot coverage. Lot coverage.
So hold, let's take some questions on that, because again, those images showed existing conditions. So
Correct.
that was shown as an example of these are some examples of the conditions in there as they relate to separation distance. You saw that included sheds, that included porches in terms of the calculus to those separation distances. So as we discuss the proposed ordinance or shaping that, that's what we're taking into consideration. How close would one home be to another, or their accessory buildings be to those homes, et cetera, okay?
Could you define the purpose of variances, setbacks, distances between buildings, whether they're a porch, a shed, or a home? What is the purpose of these variances and distances?
I'll try to answer that for you. As I spoke earlier to the nice lady over there's question, a municipality has pretty wide authority to regulate land use within its borders. Actually all zoning codes have provisions for distances between buildings and regulations for all kinds of things, height, setbacks, differences, etc. Thus, those are what we're talking about here today. A variance is the ability of the Board of Adjustment for when there's special conditions present to vary the terms of the zoning ordinance in a judicial fashion.
So may I ask, where is the priority rated for our public health and safety?
So the public health and safety, and I'm going to go back to 22 Delaware Code 303 again. The public health and safety is regulated by the council in their zoning determinations for height, setbacks, and all of those things. And they have to be, the code actually says for the health, safety, and welfare of the community. That's the reason they have the authority to impose these rules.
One last question. Thank you for your time. So there's consideration for emergency vehicles such as fire trucks, ambulances, whatever is needed if there is an emergency. These setbacks, these changes, these variances are considering what I consider the most important is our health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
So these variances have been studied and they meet everyone's approval to procure our health and safety. Is that right?
To her question.
If I could, those last several questions I thought were right on the mark, but I think the answers were not complete. There are federal rules that were established because of the tragedies of what happened over many decades in manufactured home communities. They were established in terms of setbacks, distance between dwellings, height of dwellings, burn-through rate of materials, everything about it. A manufactured home under current rules is as sturdy, if not more so, than any of the other houses built in Lewis right now. In fact, I dare say they're more stringent than many. And we have to consider that changing these rules so that they don't conform with federal standards puts people at risk.
This one's a short question.
If I can answer his question first.
Okay.
All houses, all manufactured homes that are placed within the community and throughout the city are HUD compliant. And that is the federal requirement, and they are all required to provide documentation that they comply with the HUD regulations. So
This one is a short one. I'm sorry. Do you have, that's really fascinating that you know the separation distances. Do you have that for 180 lots?
I do not. The city obtained these from the county, and this is what the county had for some of the properties within the community.
So part of this journey is for us to figure out, and you'll teach us or measure how separate, what our separation distances are? Yeah.
Again, I was asked to explain what the separation distance is.
Just a quick point of clarification. The standards for a house and the standards for the community have to be conjoined. You're correct that the houses have to have a stamp on the house, actually affixed, that identifies that they're in compliance with federal rules. Again, if their structure has not been altered, some have. But the standards for the community are what the setbacks and the distances between structures are about, and that's not the same as the standards for the structure itself.
Okay, so on to lot coverage. What is it? Lot coverage is the amount of land you can cover with a structure, with a driveway, with a sidewalk. So what lot coverage says is you can have so much covered by a structure and so much has to be grass.
Into these definitions here, but could you say again, what is the general description of the coverage of the lot as you just said it?
It's
It's house footprint, decks.
Yeah, if we go to the next slide, Blue.
Okay.
So what counts as lot coverage, again, is your house footprint, your decks, your sidewalks, your driveways, your porches, your sheds.
Okay.
So the rest of it then needs to be grass, flowers, gardens. So now we're going to move on to what is a text amendment? So what a text amendment is a change to the wording in the city's code. So typically when this happens, when we notice there's a conflict of the code, or if somebody's going to the Board of Adjustment for a number of things and they keep getting approved, that means there's something that in the code that needs to be fixed. And text amendments go through the ordinance process, and they are adopted by mayor and council as an ordinance. So on the next slide, why change the code with a text amendment? So right now, the city's code does not match what exists within the community. In order to submit for the conditional use to make the property conform, to make it legal, something needs to be done, because right now, the way the code is written, a conditional use application cannot be submitted because the code, there's the inability for the application to meet the code requirements for the conditional use. So what does the proposed text amendment do? The intent is to better reflect what exists in the community and to reduce the nonconformity within the community. So the next is the text amendment process. So text is identified that it needs to be fixed. Sometimes it goes to the Planning Commission for recommendation. Other times it just goes straight to mayor and council for them to schedule a public hearing and then make a determination. Does everybody understand what a text amendment is? Okay. So the next is, what is a conditional use? Again, it's a use that's been determined that it makes sense within that zoning district, but should go through a public hearing process. So on the next is, why does Donovan Smith community need a conditional use? So as we previously discussed, between our permitted, conditional, and a special use, a manufactured home community is a conditional use. So again, the conditional use is needed so the development will comply with the city's zoning code. Okay. Okay, so what is the process? It starts with an application from the property owner. It will then go to the planning commission and they will hold a public hearing and take public comment. They can place conditions on the application and then they make a recommendation to mayor and council. Then mayor and council will hold another public hearing and will consider again what the public has to say and can place conditions on the application.
Okay.
So, and then a site plan will be submitted verifying the conditions of approval and that it's in compliance with the zoning code.
So you're saying the zoning code change text amendment that you're proposing is just in case the owner applies for conditional use?
The owner has to apply for a conditional use.
If he wants to do something? Correct. Or period?
Correct.
El uso, ella
If he
pregunta,
wants to place homes, he has to apply for conditional use. But if he never places homes after this, he doesn't have to apply?
It means nobody can place a home on the property.
So if my house burned down, I couldn't get a new house?
Correct. You could apply for a special use exception, a special, Max, the Board of Adjustment, they could apply for a use variance, but as Max has indicated, the standard is very high and very difficult to
I'm gonna let
obtain.
a translator talk and then
Yeah.
I will go.
Thank you, Max.
Could I just respond? Because I didn't have that opportunity.
okay.
So, under the conditional use, let's assume, God forbid, that there was a catastrophic event and something burned down. There would be a process, but it wouldn't be sort of a by right process right away where you would have to go through additional approvals to get the ability to rebuild that house, whether or not you could meet the standards, et cetera.
If that happens to an individual owner, a homeowner, does that conditional use application have to come from the owner of the unit or the owner of the park?
The conditional use application under any circumstance would have to come from the park owner. But if you had a situation where you had a particular structure that was destroyed, don't quote me on this, but I do believe that could come from the individual owner.
I think my question is probably for council. And I just want to make sure I understand. My understanding is that for the community to continue to operate as it is today, let's say frozen in time with the number of units that are there today, they do not need a conditional use permit because it's essentially grandfathered in. But the conditional use permit would be then to allow the community owner to bring in new units to empty lots pursuant to the terms of the application. Juxtaposed with if an individual home disappears for some reason, either by fire or because it's too old or because it just needs to be replaced, the one mechanism that would not be allowed as it is right now, but the mechanism for an individual homeowner to replace their home would be to ask for a variance, which has been described here as difficult to get, but I'm not concerned about that, but is that understanding of the processes involved approximately correct?
In most circumstances, your description is spot on, in most circumstances.
So to make this real, if our houses are close together and we have a lot of uninspected new homes that are actually stick-built and have a lot of folks in them, right now, should there be a fire, heaven forbid, because that has happened, could I replace my house?
You would
Right
have to
now?
go to the Board of Adjustment and ask for a variance to try and replace your house.
So I would have to ask someone to replace my house unless we agreed to all these terms? Oh, no, I'm just confused about the conditional use. Couldn't I apply for conditional use?
No, you cannot. The property owner applies for the conditional use.
But I could apply through the Board of Adjustment.
Correct.
And so the truth is that it's up to him to decide if I can replace my home, which is the inequity between the homeowner.
No.
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 Okay, so if the conditional use is able to be submitted, we're gonna get a site plan, because I know everybody's wanting to see a site plan. So that would come in with a conditional use application. Okay, we're good on the conditional use? All right, let's dive into the proposed ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah. There is not, but it could be a condition of approval if you so choose. And then mayor and council approves that condition. The property owner.
Who builds it?
Who pays for it. Okay, so let's talk about the code. The existing city code says the minimum lot size for your land leased area is supposed to be 5,000 square feet. So again, in the second column, you can see what the existing code says. So in the third column, you see the typical lots within the community. In the middle column is what is currently being proposed. So on the next slide are some examples of options for the lot sizes, lot frontage, lot coverage, setbacks, building height, etc. So what are your ideas for, say, lot size?
Well, since you only have 5 examples of lots, and we have 130, I would say typical lots in the community, we don't know. So I think it makes sense for us to figure out what the lots are. Some folks have very small lots, some have medium, some have large. So until we really know, because you only really have 5 examples out of 130, it would be hard to make an option selection to me.
Sorry, looking through this, I'm seeing 2 things. If you look at the lot coverage with the structures, in the middle, the proposed is 65%, and then there is only a 5-foot separation distance, where if you look what the typical lots in the community, it's a 35% with a 5-foot setback. So that means that there's going to be a lot of structure with a little land in between. Isn't that a fire hazard? And the other thing that I'm looking at is build within the floodplain. Existing Lewis code says you can't build within the floodplains. Why would we build a bunch of new sites? That's going to be changed to yes now. It seems to me this gentleman wouldn't be able to, whoever owns the property, build unless they do this exact annexation. Is that correct?
The lot sizes range based on the information we have from the 1970-something survey, from other surveys that have been done. So we have based on what the information we have for the entire community. Again, we don't have the exact, because we don't have that, but we have what was originally platted and what is, so that's how we came up with the information. So, and for the floodplain question, the only place the city prohibits building in the floodplain is within a manufactured home community, because there is a very large portion of the city that is in the floodplain that has been built upon.
Just a clarifying question, because that didn't really answer my question about being a fire hazard with the 5 feet in between such a large portion.
No, there's,
Up to 65%.
That
is the setback.
Yes.
60 feet.
So the setback is you can be 5 feet from your property line, but you still have to be 16 feet away from the other structure.
Okay, that's the point.
Okay, and then on the floodplain, you said the only things that cannot be built are manufactured homes.
No.
A further point on the floodplain issue. The entire state of Georgia has banned construction in floodplains because building in floodplains will be guaranteed to flood. Now, Lewis has done a great deal of building in floodplains, but that's not a good thing. But more than that, one of the things that's been totally ignored is every single impervious structure you put into a floodplain increases the flooding for everything in there. It makes it exceedingly more harmful, and we're surrounding Lewis with this, a situation we could have prevented if we'd stuck to the 2005 comprehensive plan. That being the case, this only exacerbates the likelihood of harm to property, loss of life, and everything else. Why are we doing this?
About the floodplain is there are approximately 30 houses currently within the floodplain within the community. And by allowing building within the floodplain would allow those homeowners to have the ability to use their land leased areas. But if you do not want that to happen, you just let us know. Because we're looking for feedback. So if you don't want building in the floodplain, let us know.
Can I ask a factual question? Because I'm just not sure. At the top of this column, it says a typical lot in the community is built in the floodplain. And I think you just said there are 30 homes built in the floodplain. 30 out of how many?
Okay, so what it should say is typical in the community. Yes, there are houses built within the floodplain. That's what's typical about the community is there are houses built within the floodplain, and I need to let you.
What I'm trying to get a sense of, which I think is important, is how many out of how many, right? And I think it makes a difference for the community to understand 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 out of however many they are, because that's relevant in assessing whether one wants to allow building in the floodplain. What you really need to know is how many homes are in the floodplain now out of how many in the community, particularly if the word typical is subject to different interpretations. So just a precise number on that probably would be helpful for the community members in order to assess how important an issue this is for them and on the land which is currently empty, I think, where the idea is to potentially put new homes. Is that land in or not in the floodplain? So I think you want to have very concrete answers to which part of the community is in the floodplain, which is not in the floodplain, so that assessments can be made as to whether the residents of the community support or oppose allowing building in the floodplain, which then the council will consider in that.
So everything in green up on the screens is within the floodplain. And everything in blue are the houses that are currently located within the floodplain. Okay, so I really quickly want to, this slide is to get you starting to think about what, if you don't like what the proposed code says, what ideas do you have? The column in blue is just examples. It's just a jumping off point. So just start thinking about what do you think the lot size should be? What do you think the lot coverage should be? Just start thinking about it, and you can go back and use the presentation to help. All right, so now we're going to talk about the landscape buffer, allowing steps and landings to encroach, and the open space requirement. So right now, the existing code says there's supposed to be a 50-foot landscape buffer around the entire perimeter. It also, right now, the code does not allow for steps and landings to encroach into the setbacks like currently the county code does. So this would be complying with what the county code says.
The county code
allows the encroachment of the steps and landings.
Okay.
Okay, and then the last one is the open space requirement. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to take a look at the landscape buffer. Everything in yellow is a buffer, again, also the floodplain, that will remain. The areas in green is where a landscape buffer would have to be installed. The problem with that is if you go 50 feet from the property inwards, you'd be into the middle of somebody's house. Okay, so now we're going to move on to open space. So right now, we're not sure how much open space exists in the community. So right now, the proposal is that a minimum, this is your jumping off point, your minimum is 3/4 of an acre of open space be provided on the site. I'm sorry?
3/4
Three-quarters an acre of open space for the community is your minimum.
Okay.
Now, as part of a conditional use, if it turns out there's 20,000 acres of open space, which I know there's not because it's not, there's more open space, that can be required to be a condition of approval that there's more open space for the development. So again, the 3/4 of an acre is just your jumping off point as the bare minimum they have to provide. The hope is there's a lot more open space that then will be. So the next slide is starting to get you thinking, do you want the landscape buffer around the entire community? Or maybe a condition could be just keep it on the side where the Ebenezer branch is. It's a yes or no or a combination. Would you like to allow the steps and the landings to be closer to the property line, which is currently allowed under county code? And having a minimum, again, your jumping off point is 3/4 of an acre or more of open space. So the next steps is we want to hear from the community. If you don't like the proposal and have other suggestions, we want to hear from you. There will be a public, Blue, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So there will be a public hearing, September 25th at 6 p.m. here. Again, between now and then, you can submit comments to me, and I will make sure they get passed on to mayor and council. And even after the public hearing, council usually leaves the record open for even more public comment. So again, thank you for coming. Now we're going to get to questions and concerns. And again, if you have questions or comments or suggestions, just email them to me and my...
My trailer is a solar flood, so what can you do with that?
What did you say?
Is she saying that she's in a floodplain?
So
her trailer is in the floodplain. What can we do about that?
So right now it can stay, but if you're going to do any work, it most likely will have to be elevated, lifted up to be out of the floodplain.
Do I have to do it on my own?
On your own?
Or the public will
Does she have to do it on her own?
Concepcion, we're not saying that tomorrow you need to go out and raise your house, but yeah, if you needed to do improvements to your house and come into compliance, that would be the homeowner's responsibility.
Yeah.
And there are options from FEMA to get some assistance. And John can help with lots of those questions.
Mr. Saunders, I have a couple of people ahead of you, sir.
I actually have 3 questions. The first one is, so to the homes that are in the floodplain now, if we don't adopt any type of new code, they're grandfathered in and they're fine how they are? Or
Correct.
They need to, Okay. So the next one is, it seems like a lot of the things in the proposed code are ways to increase the density and kind of be able to just develop in a floodplain and build a bunch of new units there that are bigger than the ones that are there now. Is that that's kind of what it looks like?
So there is no increase in the number of land leased areas in this community.
I think it's 120.
I think it's 120.
So again, if there's an empty lot, so there's approximately 128 land leased areas in the community. There is no additional land leased areas being created as part of anything that the city is doing.
Only land leased areas or buildable lots of any kind?
Again, the entire community is land leased area.
So what would be if the existing lots would be, the existing houses that are in a floodplain would be grandfathered in, what is the purpose in allowing them to build in a floodplain unless there's additional building that's going to happen?
It would allow them to do an addition. It would allow them to put a shed. It would allow them to do other things. And one of the recommendations from the Planning Commission was that there shall be no creation of new land leased areas within the floodplain.
Okay, last thing, and then I'll hand it off to someone. So this code would this affect all of Lewis, or is this just this one community because if you're like allowing flooding in a floodplain, is that wider than just this community in this area?
Oh, the only place you can't right now build in the floodplain is this community. Everywhere else you can build in the floodplain
Because
in
of
the
the
city.
zoning.
Because of the way the code is written. Okay, John, you said, yep, okay.
Okay, I'm going to try and run very quickly through a couple of items. First of all, I'd like to bring everyone's attention to the Glenville community. It's in Delaware. It's a ghost town. It became a ghost town since the year 2000. Why? Because the whole community was in a floodplain. They went to Congress to bail the entire community out. Why are we buying liability when we know what's happening? Secondly, the state of Delaware has been telling people, don't plan to the existing floodplains, plan to the future, because sea level is rising. Lewis is projected to have a 5-foot sea level rise by the state's own projections. If you look at the map you had up earlier, that 500-year plain is 100 years now. The 100-year plain is less. We shouldn't be building there. Third, this whole thing was a dump. It's never been cleaned out. The whole thing was covered in sand. So it's built on top of a dump, and no one has done an environmental assessment. You need to do it. You don't know what's there. You don't know what pollution's there. And if you look at the map, that whole distance on the left is part of Canary Creek. That's a floodplain. Public health hasn't been addressed. There's been no assessment. These are all potential liabilities. The city of Lewis needs to look deeper and broader. The city of Lewis avoided going to the state and federal government for years to get money that was available to mitigate problems in Lewis. That's the reason that almost an entire community is no longer here. Lewis has raised the cost of everything, so we don't have affordable housing. We don't have an entire community which can no longer afford to live here. It set these rules, including the exclusionary kinds of zoning, to keep out certain communities. You need to come to grips with that reality and that history. You can set these rules to accommodate what's there, but don't make it worse. Set the rules so that you raise the level, so that this problem gets resolved over time. Address the reality as it is, don't make it worse.
That was actually September of 2003. And it was 149 houses out of 200.
John, who's next? Yep.
I have 3 questions. Why do we have to have more impervious surface? Why do we have to have less open space? And let's talk about the elephant in the room. 30 homes, we were told, that were going to be placed in our community. I knocked on every door, maybe like, we only have 80 residents now, 80 trailers. So I knocked on 80 trailers with the other HOA members. 3/4 of them said, where are 30 new homes going to be placed? Are they going to be placed on that nasty septic field, corner to corner to corner in any empty lot? Are we making the setbacks smaller, the footprints larger, so people can build additions, which is something you really don't put on a manufactured home? We are an impoverished community. Nobody's putting on additions in fancy fancy gazebos, etc. The other thing is, how does this benefit this community? Have you done a study to see what we really need? Do you know now that we have random people coming in because there's so little housing that at night folks drop off other folks so they can sleep there? The lady over here talked about the community. The community is random. The community is overrun, overcrowded. So I guess my question is, how does this benefit? Because planning a community is not for today, it's for 25, 50, and 100 years. I don't understand why a wealthy town like this would put itself in a setup to have a very, very deteriorated community, especially since you don't know what the community really is. I understand about zoning, but I suggest you come down from the 10,000 feet level down to the ground level and really see. Also, I don't see how what is the percent of green space that Lewis tries to attain? Because I heard it's a tree city. What's our green space here? The other last thing I'm going to say is we were promised, and it's on YouTube forever, that our standard of city, the standard of living would rise. I don't know how many of you on the council have been to our place, but from what I canvassed this weekend, this is not something that would necessarily benefit. We have a lot of children in our community now. They have no place to play. We have bad streets, and we also have a new crime, not drug trafficking, but human trafficking. Come and see what we're doing and what's going on, and then come up with a plan. I don't understand why you would make this more dense, larger, more populated. Everybody knows what creates ghettos and slums. Overcrowding, low wages, impoverishment, lots of people, and little opportunity.
Okay, yep.
Thank you. So, another elephant in the room that we're not talking is the owner, Mr. Donovan. I don't know him, but I know he has plenty this type of business all over, and he is not the finest at this type of business. And you might know it. You are in this business, you know your developers, and you know, and you should know if you don't, what kind of owner. So you are going to walk in this fine line of this person having certain rights to petition, but then the people you need to serve, and how you are going to create a standards of what to do when you have people that you need to protect. You need to protect these hard-working Latinos. They work in the restaurants. They clean the bathrooms and the hospitals and many other places. We need them. They should live with dignity. I don't think you want to be in the position to be sued for discrimination. You need to create an amazing thing out of this and respect the rights of those more vulnerable. And you can do it by the law when you have the will. You can do it. You have the intelligence, the desire, I hope, and also the means to do it. You cannot be perceived as the persons doing historically in an environmental moment of the planet exactly the opposite, because you want to be in this box of the regulations when you are the makers of regulation.
My question is for everyone's information, and I believe it's important, but I need your confirmation. The city solicitor, is that attorney part of the law firm that also represents the owner of Donovan Smith?
That is correct, and that's the reason I'm here, because I have nothing to do with it.
So you're an attorney for
A different
city.
Okay. John.
I just want to go by that map that was from the 1970s. So it shows 130 lots approximately. But that was when it was like a camper community, or the mobile homes were way smaller than even your smallest mobile home is now. So it seems like if we're going by existing lots, we're talking about those 130 lots. And that leaves very little green space or very little space between the trailers. And I understand that, you know, anything that has to go in there at this point has to be newer or brand new. I'm not sure exactly what the requirement there was. But it's going to go in next to something that might be 50 years old, 40 years old. And if that person puts a much bigger, you know, mobile home in that lot, and then they build a deck that fills up 65% so that their deck is 5 feet from that 50-year-old home, it just seems like you're inviting that place to burn down. Because, you know, I witnessed this past weekend a renter that, you know, we have a couple rentals in there that are overcrowded, that took a fire, I don't even know if it was a barbecue grill or a fire pit, and had a fire on a wood deck right in front of a 50-year-old mobile home. Wow. Scared me to death. And then, you know, it just seems like we're inviting trouble if we go by that 1975 map. We need to update, look at the size of what things are now. What is the size of something that you want to put in there? We're not saying that we won't allow, that we don't want anything in there, or that we don't want to see new homes and new families. We just want it to be a little more realistic.
So I just want to clarify something. It's a 5-foot setback from a property line or a land lease line, but you still have, which was proposed, or right now it's an 8-foot, but you still have to be 16 feet away from the adjacent house. So structures will not be 5 feet away from each other because a setback is relation to the property line, but the separation distance is between the two buildings, and you have to meet both.
Building, is it the shed, is it the shed in the deck, or if I have a shed, so is it 16 feet from shed to the next house or the next shed? Can you hold on a second?
Can you give her a moment?
Yes, is your answer.
So it's 16 feet between shed and shed?
Yes, and 16 feet from a shed to a house on the adjacent property.
If I had a shed and a shed, so is it 16 feet between each shed, or is it 16 feet between?
Any structure.
Any structure.
Any structure.
Unless it's on your land lease area.
16 pies.
Okay.
So it's the separation distance. You can have your shed closer to your house, but your neighboring house and your neighboring shed, all your structures need to meet 16 feet away.
I think what I think everybody can hear me.
For people on Zoom.
Sorry. We have with the rentals and how many houses are coming in, and back to something that we have no idea who's in our neighborhoods anymore.
Put it close to your
Because they're
mouth.
renters, and there's a lot of people in a mobile home. We don't even know who actually is in the mobile homes now. Or who's on the lease, yeah, any of this. And we feel like giving our landlord now has more power than he had before we got annexed into you, that he abuses and uses. We all got new leases that we had to sign or we would get evicted.
Yeah, you didn't sign a new lease.
Oh, yeah. That I
have never signed a new lease, 30 years.
Well, they had told me that if we didn't sign the new lease, put on who was in the property, I had to send my dog papers in with the shots and how many, and all that kind of stuff, or we would be evicted, just the same with the boats. Well, that's not what I was told. Did I not sign the new lease? Yes.
Are the rentals, are they seasonal rentals, or are they vacation rentals, or long-term
I'm
rentals?
on vacation. I don't know. These are their, there's no distinction.
You don't know what they are?
But
You're not sure?
She needs to translate.
Oh, the rentals, they're just.
Hold on.
Wait a minute.
Hold on.
Hello.
One person at a time.
So if anybody has any comments, suggestions about what to change in the proposed ordinance, please send them to me and I will make sure they get passed on to mayor and council. And again, the public hearing will be September 25th here at 6 p.m. in this room.